Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ebony and today I have a video that is a part 2 of a video that I did a very long time ago. And just to give you a little background context for this video, I am a person who has BBF, and BBF stands for Big Book Fear. Anything like a monster of a book, it scares me, it intimidates me for a multitude of reasons, but primarily because number one, I feel like I have the attention span of a goldfish, and sitting through anything that is longer than 400 pages really intimidates me. And then also just visually something happens where I'm like looking at a big book and I'm like, oh my god, am I ever gonna get through this? Like, reading is partly psychological for me too. So with that, I did last year a video that was titled 10 short books for your short attention spans, and this is a part 2. I'm going to be mentioning some of my favorite books that I've read on my reading journey, and then also as well as some new books that I really would like to recommend to you. So the first book that I want to recommend, especially in honor of spooky season, is The Houseguest, and this is a collection of short stories that is translated from the Spanish, and it explores like human paranoia as well as like the darker parts of human psychology. I would consider this more to be like a psychological thriller than actually horror. And on the back of the book, it does compare Amparo Davila to the likes of Shirley Jackson and Edgar Allan Poe, and a lot of these stories did feel Edgar Allan Poe-esque to me. I think The Houseguest is a great short book to read. It falls under 200 pages, and it's a great book to pick up this spooky season that you can just kind of breeze through. And also, if you are a chicken like me and super horror, scary things bother you, I wasn't too scared reading this, but I will say that I did have a nightmare that someone was stalking me after reading this. So do with that as you will. Now, when I think of a story that was so precise and so exact, and it had a tempo, and it explored heavy topics, but it kind of felt like a whirlwind, and the image of just going in a car on the highway, just speeding through it, and you're just like constantly going somewhere, but you never arrive at your destination. I think of Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion. This is truly one of my favorite books ever. I love Play It As It Lays. And it follows our main character, Mariah, who is an actress. She is in a marriage. Her marriage is dissolving. She also has a child who is sick. And it's all about kind of like the inner life and the inner turmoil of a former film star, and as her life is just basically dissolving around her. But when I say, and this is why I also love short novels, I think it's truly a show of a master of craft when an author is able to convey so much with so little words. No surprise here, I'm a poetry lover, and that's what I love about poetry too. And this is exactly what Joan Didion does. It's just a very atmospheric, very sad, and just you hurt for Mariah and the characters in the story, but it's just something like so compelling about Didion's writing that just makes you want to keep on reading. It is truly a book that like has given me that type of reading experience, and I haven't really found another book to do the same to me. This is like not a novel, cool, I've never heard of it recommendation, but believe me when I tell you, you need to read this. And I just love anything Joan Didion. So if you are missing the summer, the feeling of the dog days and it being super hot, and you want to climb out of your skin and there's mosquitoes flying all around you and you're swatting at them, you need to read Dogs of Summer. And this also falls under 200 pages. It follows our main character, who is a very young girl. She's like adolescent, and it takes place on the Canary Islands. This is also translated fiction from the Spanish, and it really explores female friendships. If you like My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante, you could read Dogs of Summer and get the same feelings and sentiments about female friendship that you would, but just in a very short, compact novel. And it follows our main character, who we don't really know her name. She views herself entirely through the lens of her friend Isabel, I want to say. It's been a while since I read this, so entirely through the lens of her friend, and you see them as they begin to explore relationships, just get into neighborhood trouble, just get into trouble as young girls who are exploring. And there's this feeling of constantly wanting to get to the ocean, but once again, do they get there, you know? And I think that's great. I think it's always something interesting to have like a sort of underlying motive that gets the reader to continue reading. And I read Dogs of Summer last summer, not this summer, but in 2022, and I really enjoyed it. So definitely recommend. It's under 200 pages as well. I'm pretty sure every book that I mentioned is going to be under 200 pages. So yes. Up next, a collection of prose / poetry. You know, I wasn't going to post a video without mentioning at least one book of prose or poetry, and that is Citizen, an American Lyric by Claudia Rankine. And let me tell you, Claudia Rankine, if you do not know, is one of the most prolific voices, I think, in contemporary poetry. I absolutely adore everything that she does. And she recently had a talk with Solange for Solange's ballet in New York City. And anyway, I wanted to go, but I couldn't. That's a tangent. But Citizen, an American Lyric by Claudia Rankine really explores what Blackness is in America, and it does so in such, once again, a precise and compelling way. It says so much without so many words. The brevity that Claudia Rankine has, especially when conveying such a nuanced and complex topic such as the history of politics when it comes to the Black body and like the ethical issues surrounding that. And she does it in a way where she utilizes the second person, so there is the use of you a lot for the reader, which I love in this context. And then, yeah, it's just such a great poetry collection. I read it a long time ago. I wish I owned it because there are images to accompany the poetry as well, and it just makes it even more impactful. And I highly recommend, if you have not read Citizen yet by Claudia Rankine, it is an awesome read. A book also written by a poet that is kind of a memoir in verse is called The Terrible, and this is by Yrsa Daley-Ward. I read this book years ago when I was first getting back into reading, and I have since reread it, and I very rarely reread books, but I just think that the way that Yrsa Daley-Ward chose to tell her story, the story of a young immigrant in Britain and England who comes from the Caribbean, growing up with a mother who could not take care of her children, and therefore she lived with her grandparents. The whole idea of like religious angst being present, also doing things and getting yourself into situations as a young woman. It's a great read. I loved it. And for those who have read it, if I recommended, I haven't heard one person complain about it yet. So I definitely recommend that you check it out as well if you want to read an experimental memoir that takes poetry and verse and tells the story of a life through it. I think it's great. So my next recommendation is Bodywork. This is by Melissa Febos. And once again, this is a mix of memoir, and it's also a mix of like literary analysis, also why poets write, why people write, and how craft is used to tell personal narratives. And I loved this body work because when you think about it, you are considering the body or the words of a story. Then also Melissa Febos ties in a lot of her own past, being someone who had drug addiction and also was a sex worker, and taking that and transforming it into a personal narrative. It was such a good book. Also, the analysis of other contemporary poets and writers was great. So I recommend this if you're looking for nonfiction. It is 153 pages long, and it is a great read, especially the first kind of essay essay, I want to say, is in praise of navel gazing. I would also like to recommend Friday Black, and this is by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, and this is a collection of fiction of short stories. It kind of feels Black Mirror-esque, and I read this a while ago too, but I remember so many stories sticking out to me from the short story collection. It once again kind of explores the darker sides of humanities, especially through the lens of like a marginalized person and or community. And there's an essay in there called Zimmerland, which is kind of a retelling of Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. Not essays, I'm sorry, stories. There's so many great short stories in there, once again, that I remember reading and thinking, wow, this is brilliant, you know, and it's just a book that has stuck with me. I would love to recommend Heads of the Colored People. This is by Nafissa, Thompson, Spires. This is a collection of short stories as well that kind of highlights or examines scenarios, situations of marginalized communities, maybe in places of power or in a power imbalance, and what that means. Also just like spaces that people of color, BIPOC people occupy, but maybe we don't really get the narratives from those sides as much as we should. And that's where these stories exist, and more specifically what goes on in the heads of like these people in these situations. Please read this. I included it in my favorites video for a reason, because it is such a great underrated, criminally underrated short story collection, and it's only 197 pages. Once again, this isn't really a novel recommendation, but I have to tell you to read The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. And this is 2 essays written on the centennial commemoration, I guess, of the Emancipation Proclamation. And it's James Baldwin reflecting on where Black people are in America, post-Civil War, post-emancipation, the struggles that are still had, but also the victories. And we all know James Baldwin writes from a place of profound observation and love, and this is just such a short, quick read, but truly once you read it, you'll see how referenced it is in other books and media, and it's just great. And what I really enjoyed about it too is James Baldwin's reflections on specifically the church and Christianity and its roles in Black liberation. So highly recommend this. Lastly, I'm going to recommend Toni Morrison, and that is Recitatif. This is a very short, it's a novella, it's less than 100 pages, but my oh my, is it like probably one of the most creative things I've ever read. The premise follows 2 young girls who are both friends in a home. One of their mothers, or one of them is Black, the other is white. However, that identifier of who is who never gets revealed to the reader. and Toni Morrison challenges the reader's own perceptions of race and how the stereotypes of race, everything, like what is race. So she highlights that, and she does so by presenting stereotypes that maybe would fit into the categories of one race, and they kind of flip-flop back and forth, and it's really up to the reader to decide. And what is so brilliant is it's titled after this type of music that is composed so that I believe it's like 2 songs in one. Honestly, editing Ebony, you might want to insert like what a recitatif is in music, and I just thought like that metaphor for this story was brilliant. Like honestly, the story blows my mind. Also, the opening by Zadie Smith, I just love Zadie Smith. I think she's a great essayist and writer. Like, do you need me to tell you that? No, but anyway, it's just such an interesting story that challenges you as the reader. It kept me engaged the entire time because I want to identify who is who. And I would recommend actually that you read the story first and then the introduction by Zadie Smith, because she did give away some things in the book. But yeah, anyway, just great all around. Highly recommend. Thank you so much for watching this video. This goes out to all of the people like me who love a short read. Thank you for being here. I hope you are well and safe wherever you are, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye.